All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of the Addicted Mind podcast. I hope you're having a wonderful day. My name is Duane. I'm your host. Our guest today is Chandler Rogers. Chandler Rogers is the CEO and co-founder of Relay, a digital group-based program for finding healing from addiction. And I am excited to say, also a sponsor of the Addicted Mind podcast. So after years of feeling stuck in isolation, Chandler discovered firsthand the power of connection and creating a strong support system. He graduated from Brigham Young University with a degree in business and computer science and is currently living in New York City with his wife, Jade. So today, Chandler is going to talk about his project, Relay, and using the digital realm to help people who are struggling with addiction find connection. So Chandler's going to share his own personal story of overcoming behavioral addiction and how he realized he could take his work and his talents to create something really meaningful to be able to really help others. And you can just hear that passion in his work. And I'm super excited to share Chandler's story and what he is trying to do to make Relay into something pretty amazing. It's just inspiring to listen to him pour in his heart into this project to really help others and put something really meaningful into the world. So it was really fun to interview him and very inspiring. So I hope you get a lot out of this episode. And if you're getting a lot out of the Addicted Mind podcast, please rate and review us in iTunes. That really does help support the podcast. I really appreciate it. I do read them. They mean a lot to me. So thank you everyone who's taken the time to do that. And follow us on Instagram at Addicted Mind Podcast. So check that out as well. And let's go ahead and start this episode. All right, everyone. Welcome to the Addicted Mind. My guest today is Chandler Rogers, and he is the CEO and co-founder of Relay, which is an app for recovery. So we're going to get into that. We're going to talk all about that. But before we get into that, using technology for recovery and how it can enhance recovery, Chandler, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you, maybe some of the reasons you wanted to create this app, and let's just jump in.
Yeah, no, sounds good. And thanks so much for having me on the podcast. Excited to be here.
Awesome.
So yeah, I guess to introduce myself, Chandler Rogers, my background professionally from a young age, I was always interested in technology. And so people who know me well aren't super surprised that I'm working on an app, but most people don't know about my background and how it pertains to addiction and the personal connection and experiences that I had that ultimately led me to go work on something like Relay instead of going to like Google or Microsoft and working on some other piece of technology that maybe doesn't help the world as much. But that's a conversation for another day.
Yeah, definitely.
I grew up moving around a lot in a lot of different places. I was the oldest of 5 kids with parents who were very religious and from a young age had, I think, a strong sense of wanting to instill values in us to be good people. And I think as the oldest, I felt this sense of responsibility pretty heavily. Like I wanted to be good, and I could tell they had a lot of expectations. And, I think they did a great job at, showing us love and parenting us in a lot of the best ways that they could. But I remember growing up, like having emotionally intimate conversations were a little more rare.
Right.
I think potentially like in their families, my mom's parents were divorced. My dad's dad didn't have a really good relationship with him, but, I think that they were trying to make the best of trying to figure out how do we raise kids in a world where there's a lot of conflicting values and no family is perfect. But I remember like as I got in my teenage years, it was interesting because on the one hand, I felt like my parents tried to do a good job at creating an open space for conversations around sensitive things. And one of those things was around pornography. And they had kind of talked to us about, hey, this is something you might run into. It's something we've seen, cause a lot of harm in people's relationships. We hope you can feel, open talking to us if it's something you happen to stumble across, but, just a heads up. And that was a conversation we had. As I get into high school years, I do remember eventually stumbling upon pornography and masturbation as I was kind of growing up and getting older.
Right,
and
yeah.
I think it wasn't until really a couple months after that first exposure that I realized that I had started to engage a little habitually in what I guess what, I wasn't even connecting the dots like, oh, I guess this is actually that thing that we had talked about. Like I think this is
Right.
pornography, and now I'm finding myself feeling, the dopamine hits, or feeling like it was something I needed to have. Not trying to say that I was addicted, or anything that fast, but I remember just feeling like I don't want to be doing this anymore. But after that, I just remember feeling like I couldn't really control it. Like the willpower wasn't enough. I started feeling a lot of shame thinking about, if my parents knew or other people knew, you know, maybe I'm not so good of a person after all. And I think that really
Right. And then the shame kind of
impacted.
kicks in
Oh yeah,
and all of that kind of stuff, which just is like a feedback loop of shame, escape, shame, escape, shame, escape.
totally. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. And I think I really let it define everything about my self-worth, I think, for those few years. And to give a little more perspective, I was a fairly confident kid, I would say, and
Yeah.
I achieved pretty well in school or sports, and, was someone that most people wouldn't probably guess was dealing with something that was impacting my view of self so heavily.
Totally.
But for me, it felt, very self-defining. Like, well, if I can't get over this, like I said I would the last, dozen, 100 times, I'm kind of fast forwarding in years a little bit, but, if I can't get over it, then I'm not successful as a person. It doesn't matter how these other areas of my life are going.
Yeah. It's all consuming. And I'm glad you're sharing your story, and you're a bit younger than me. And, I remember growing up where, the internet wasn't around in the way it is
Yeah.
today.
Hmm.
And so I think your story resonates with a lot of younger people who have grown up in the age of internet pornography,
Right.
where it's different than pornography in the old days, I guess. Oh, God, I'm dating myself here. But it's like it is. And I think for a lot
Yeah,
of
you don't
people,
have to
like
go
you
looking
said,
for it.
yeah, you don't have to go looking for it. And it's infinite, and it's highly engaging. And so I think, for a lot of young people, even like you said, you came from a family that was trying to be supportive, that this kind of pornography can still kind of get you in and kind of suck you in. And if you're susceptible to that, yeah, your life becomes all around it. And
Yeah.
yeah, all that shame starts to set in. And then it's just like a feedback loop.
Yeah, totally. And the thought constantly ran through my head, like, maybe I can do this on my own. But the more and more times that cycle kept happening, the more I think I was starting to be honest and realizing, like, maybe I can't, and maybe I should think about, is there anyone I can talk to or get support from, because this clearly isn't working, right? This has now been a few years since I first recognized that, there was an issue and I didn't want to be engaging in these behaviors, to now, like, okay, it's been a couple years of futile, white knuckling, and no skills, no education, no knowledge around, maybe there was a reason I was seeking out pornography and other things in my life that were creating
Yeah.
stressors, and didn't
Yeah.
have those skills to recognize or regulate those things in a healthy way.
And realizing you can't do that alone, right? And
Oh yeah,
especially shame. Shame doesn't heal in isolation. I mean, we know that, right?
totally.
So, yeah,
Well,
you need more
and
support.
this is really where I think I started learning that lesson. Was I eventually stumbled upon like somewhat of a local group that was advertised as like for young men, kind of like 18 to 25 or 18 to 30 or something, who were trying to break free from and heal from unwanted compulsive sexual behavior. And it was over Zoom once a week for an hour, led by a therapist, I think like a licensed marriage and family therapist. And it was interesting because I think I was even open to that because I had started being honest and seeing, like, this pattern is not working of me trying to do this alone. So happy to go more into that. But I think I'd been sufficiently humbled and beat down into this state of, the status quo is not going to work. I need to do something different. And I was determined enough that I really wanted to see change. And so that even led me to be open in the first place. But once I did get to this group, I was still, nervous like anyone else, probably the first time you go to
Right.
group,
Yeah.
whether it's for this or any other issue, right? It's like, who else is going to be there? Are they creepy, pedophile dudes, or, wanted criminals? Like, who's going to be at these meetings? And surely it's going to be terrifying, and, it's going to be a rough experience. But it
Only to
wasn't.
find out something different.
Right. My initial impression was like, oh, these dudes look pretty normal, actually. And we start talking that first meeting, can't even remember what the discussion was really about. But as they were sharing some of their stories and maybe we were discussing some particular principle, I remembered as I listened to them and starting to see like, they don't seem messed up to me. I wouldn't label them failures, even if they're still working at this and they're not any more, far into sobriety than I am. So it started to get me thinking about my own shame cycle. I think that narrative I told myself and recognizing, well, I can hear them vocalizing maybe the same lies that I would tell myself. And it sure seems like a lie and not true when they say it about themselves. And I certainly wouldn't agree with that statement about themselves. So, it helped me start to recognize all of those cognitive distortions that I think I had started to believe and accept
Yeah,
in
all
my
that
own.
that's just amplified by that shame feeling of feeling so horrible, and then all of that stuff, and yeah, you're starting to like see like, wait, maybe I'm not as horrible as I think I am,
Yeah.
and that there's other parts of me, not just this, but you need that support too.
Well, totally. Yeah. And I think that was where it started to get a lot different for me was not only those first realizations, but figuring out how to stop struggling in isolation and start working together with these other peers that had the same goal. We're learning the same things and we were all there to support each other. And I think that that's really where, how in the world I'm working on an app like Relay now. It started with this first group experience and realizing, wow, it's so much better to work at this with a team of other peers
People, yeah.
and a robust support system than to do it alone. It got so much easier. Not that it got easy in general. It certainly wasn't just easy from there, but it was easier. It was great to feel like there was this environment where I could practice these skills together. We could kind of help call each other out if, there was things that just weren't making sense as we were stuck in some of these shame cycles still that we were working through, and even just having healthy accountability where it didn't feel like to my mom or somebody like I don't want to let her down. I want to make her proud. There's all this kind of weird, maybe baggage isn't the right word, but there's an existing relationship that's kind of making it tricky to have healthy accountability. But with these guys, I felt like healthy accountability was a lot easier. It wasn't only focused on sobriety. It was focused on, well, what's our plan and what were the skills that we were working, and helping each other, focus on those inputs, those things that we could control. I think that was really cool.
Yeah, and I would say too that like compassionate accountability too, because when you just do it in isolation, most of the time, I think for many of us, we try and use shame as the motivator to like
Yeah.
get us to change our behavior, which actually just ends up feeding our pain, which then feeds our escape and avoidance behaviors. And having like accountability from people that can be supportive and encouraging is so different than, when we're by ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. It helped me recognize, yeah, I do have all these fear-based motivators that probably aren't the right reasons for me to be focused on this. Like, if I'm just doing this because I want to feel like I'm not a failure by the time I leave the house or go to college or, start my career or whatever, it's not that that's inherently super wrong, but it was coming from this place of fear rather than this place of healthy compassion and curiosity. Just learning to be, I
Yeah.
think, less harsh and more, I think, discovery oriented and figuring out why this is really important to me, and even learning in the process. Like, it's a lot more than just getting over pornography. It was a lot about discovering some really important life skills, like we kind of mentioned, identifying stressors and triggers that will, happen for all of us as we go through the hard aspects of life, and learning how to cope with those in a healthy way, and how to be open and not beat ourselves down just because there's an area of our life that we're not proud of. Like, that's okay. Like, we've all got things that we aren't proud of, and this is just one of those things. It's not like it's the holy grail of things that I should, hate myself for. So,
Right, right. Yeah, definitely. And I guess, you have to do that with other people around you. I mean, that's the start of this process, right? Because
yeah.
we get stuck in our own head and we don't know our own thinking that gets us stuck in this spiral of just self-loathing. But so as you started to do this, you started to, discover like this was helping you, and you're finding your way through it. How did this start to come to the idea of like, I could make something here? I could
Mhm.
take what's happening to me and do something with it to be able to give back or to be able to help others. How did
Yeah.
that start to pop into your head?
Yeah. Well, so the story fast forwards to being in college, and I was taking a couple computer science classes at the time. And I had this friend, and essentially the class, we were able to pick any idea that we wanted to build an app for and basically get credit for building that app. And I pitched him on this idea because I think over the years I had started to notice more and more that a lot of groups will meet weekly, and there's not a lot of good tools in place to make that type of accountability and connection easy between meetings the other 6 days of the week. And so
Right.
I then, kind of ruminating on these thoughts for a little while, like, with my groups, it felt like someone would always come back to group the next time and be like, Tuesday I was really struggling, and I ended up slipping up. And we were like, well, why didn't you reach out? We got this group chat thing that we put together, and the answer was always like, well, I don't know. Like, it's hard to
Yeah.
reach out, I guess, when we're
Yeah.
not together. And that was kind of the trend. It was just like, well, it's hard to reach out. And that makes sense. Like, it is hard. Even when you have a group already, it's still easy to revert back to patterns of isolation. And I'm doing this kind of solo, single player, the other 6 days of the week. And repeatedly we would try different systems. And I think, always the one that was kind of fascinated with, like, how could we adapt our approach between meetings to better serve each other so that we don't come back and find out that no one's been doing the goals that we had committed to, or people didn't reach out when they were having a rough day, whether they relapsed or not. But realize that, like, GroupMe and WhatsApp just weren't kind of like getting the job done. It would kind of fizzle out. It was a little hard to make up our own structure with this. And so when I get to this computer science class with my buddy, I said, hey, what if there were an app that helped people who were struggling to overcome addiction? What if it made it easier to stay accountable and connected 7 days a week with their group? And the focus would be on people who already had a group. This would kind of be a complementary tool for people to use outside of group meetings. So we weren't trying to develop, our own program or curriculum or anything.
Right.
Just creating a little bit more accessible interactions that makes the accountability barrier even lower, and that connection barrier lower. And so that's kind of where it started. And it was a school project at the time. But then as we start working on it over the next, year, and we piloted this out with some of the therapists I had worked with and their groups that they were running, we were kind of surprised when a lot of people were like, holy cow, I wish I had this like 3 years ago when I was first starting out. Like, this is an awesome, thing to add to my toolkit. And we started hearing a lot of feedback around, well, what if it did this? Or, if it did this maybe slightly differently, I think it could be even better. And eventually, as we were all graduating college, at this point, we added a few other friends to our team, and we were all kind of working on this full time through college. It evolved out of this one class to, like, this is the biggest thing that we were all focused on in terms of, we were kind of getting some credit for it. So we didn't have that many classes, which made it work out well. But, we were coming to graduation, and we had over 1,000 people now using the product regularly, with a lot of them saying, like, this has been game changer, and still a lot of things that we had gotten feedback on of how it could be better. And we just decided, like, we want to really go for this and take a big swing at making a technology tool that helps people do recovery 10 times smarter than ever possible before, and not trying to be the only silver bullet in their toolkit, but trying to be something that just greatly enhances their efforts. And so that was kind of the decision we made. This was a couple years ago now that we decided to go full time on it. And we're now serving, a lot of different addiction type use cases. And the vision is still, let's try to work very closely with the people on our platform to see how we can build a tool that's in your pocket that helps you do things smarter, so that you don't have to be like me and make the same dumb mistakes for years on end.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think what you said earlier, using the app and kind of getting into it, what I noticed is that it really, I would kind of just say, the term that came up to me is it kind of greased the wheels of connection. It made it easy to find that support and easy to get onboarded onto it. It didn't feel overwhelming, and it felt like, oh, I'm in this small community. If you don't have a group that's already established, it'll suggest a small group for you where you can begin to, open yourself up and start to make those connections that are gonna heal. Yeah. So I was like, the way you did that, I think really works really, really well. And I can see you have like a lot of passion here, taking this energy. This is beyond just a project, but
Yeah.
something that I think is really needed.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and I think we realize, this is more than just for people who already have a group. Like you mentioned, it's a great starting place for people that, maybe joining a Zoom type environment or in person is a little bit big of a step. I think it does grease the wheels is the goal to make it less awkward and scary. You can stay as anonymous as you want and put, whatever name you want to go by. A lot of people do end up putting their real first name and go by that in their group, and getting a feel in a chat-based environment first for like, what is it like to work with 7, 8 other people? And then, if you want to layer in, like a live type program on top of that, you can continue to use Relay to help you, integrate those goals that you're probably working on with your therapist or whatever program you're in. So we've kind of designed it to be, something you can flex and adapt, whether you're just starting out on your journey or whether you've been at it a long time and you want just a better way to up your connection and help you continue to practice some of those basic skills.
Yeah. What were some of the biggest hurdles in like starting to put this together that you had to overcome to say, okay, we're going to really put this out there?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, one was like funding, right? So we knew how to code, and so we didn't need to outsource this and pay, tens of thousands of dollars to have it made. But as we started thinking about how do we grow it faster, how do we develop it faster, it meant, we'd love to be able to hire a few people. And at this point, we were, structured as a company. We're really trying to figure out how do we get the most talented people to help us work on this. So we think this is a special vision that could help a lot of people, hopefully.
Yeah.
And so we had to figure out like, how do we tell this story in a way that resonates with people even outside of the recovery community? And, it was interesting as I started to go about that process and talk to investors, I was actually, a little surprised at how many of them actually immediately were like, this makes sense. Like, I could totally see why there'd be a need and why approaching it in this type of way would be really powerful. And so I think it was still a learning process and figuring out how to tell that story, but we eventually were able to take on some funding so that we could. And a lot of people will ask, what are we using that funding for? We've used it purely to be able to hire people and pay them a livable wage. In today's inflated economy, we're still paying ourselves basically, nothing as the founders, but we've been able to get some really talented people to help us just make faster progress because there's just so many things that we want to improve and add to the product that it just takes time to build a really good technology tool. And so we're trying to make that faster.
And to make it really flow. And I would imagine, I mean, if you're alive and you know people, you're going to know people that have struggled with mental health issues, with addiction, with other unwanted behaviors and all of those issues. And it seems like I would imagine that that's part of it too. Like this is like a connecting platform for people who are struggling with hurt and pain and suffering, to find connection, to break that loneliness and that isolation, because I believe that's where we heal, right? We heal through the eyes of other people. And when we can get other people to kind of help us along and then we help them, it just creates a positive feedback loop. And it seems like Relay is really trying to do that, to make that happen, to make it easy for that process to take place.
Yeah, no, exactly that. I think you nailed it, especially that last piece. I'm glad you brought up about even having more opportunities to turn outwards and help others in that process, not just get help from, others to help you. I found that to be so huge in my own journey. Was the more I felt like I could help other people practice these things and be there for them, the better I did in my own healing process. And so that is a core pillar of how we see Relay's group strategy, is not just putting you in a group a little easier so that you can feel less alone, but making it easier to actually move in a direction together that involves them helping you, but also you helping them, and not in a way that expects you to be, their therapist or anything, but just, makes it easier to actually support each other in an active way, not just a passive way.
Another human being that understands the struggle.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. What is it like for you in doing this work and seeing people get the support from the app and the success stories of it? What's that like for you to
Yeah.
hear that or to see that start to manifest? Because to me, I feel your excitement. It makes me excited. It's like, oh, this is such a
Yeah.
cool project and
Yeah.
such a cool endeavor. And so I'm just wondering how that fits for you and feels for you.
No, it's really exciting. I mean, I feel like just because recovery has been such a, big percentage of my life now. I'm only 26, so if you do the math, ma- uh, not quite half my life has been, I guess,
In the struggle, yeah.
recovery has been a big part of it, and so I think sometimes I'm a little desensitized to, like, yeah, it's just the same process we all learn. It isn't almost as magical or cool for me sometimes, but what I'm always reminded by is my two co-founders actually have not personally struggled with unwanted addiction or behavior that was tough for them to break, which was interesting actually when I first was bringing them on. I wanted to find people who this was very personal to. They had friends and family members who they had supported, and so in some senses it was still
Yeah.
personal. But for them, having not gone through it themselves personally, they will react when they see someone, reach out to us and say, "Hey, like, Relay was actually the first thing I ever found. It's the first time I've talked to other people about this. Here's how it's been in the last, 4 weeks since I joined, and all of the ways that it's been so helpful." They get so excited because they're just like, "Wait, this is
That's
actually so
awesome.
cool." And then I'm reminded when I see, their reaction, like, "Oh, you're right. Like, this is cool." Even though, I've been exposed to this a little bit longer and I've seen a lot of
Right,
people
right.
work this process. Yeah, it's like it is really cool to see people who actually, like, haven't gone through this personally feel so passionate about this and be like, this is the coolest thing. And they gave up a lot of good job offers. One was going to go to Apple and be a developer at Apple, and the other one was going to go do consulting somewhere. And they both quit their other jobs to come work on Relay just because they felt like it was so
So
meaningful. So yeah, it's like
it's such
we
an
hear these stories
important
and it's so cool
project.
because yeah, it is, it's important. And like I said, like we see it as like a 10-year vision, not a, we built the app and we're done with this. Like, there's so much more that we're excited about to continue to progress the tool and make it even better and powerful for people.
Yeah, yeah. I liked how it also kind of walks you through doing some of your work, doing some of like setting up your recovery zone
Yeah.
and getting
Yeah.
your that set up and started. It's just kind of like invites you to do it and walks you through it in a very easy, unoverwhelming way. That's the best way I can describe it. It's like it doesn't feel overwhelming. It felt very easy to do. And I wasn't, yeah, it didn't put me off. In fact, it was just like, yeah, I can do that right now. Let me just do that.
Well, I'm
And
glad it felt
and
that way. That's definitely the goal.
yeah, because as a mental health professional working with clients, when they come in and try and do this work, it can feel really overwhelming. It can
Yeah.
feel so
It is
big.
complex. Yeah.
Yeah. And so having something to just kind of walk them a little step at a time, creating their recovery plan or creating their circle plan, being able to
Mhm.
like see that and just kind of walk through a little step at a time is
Right.
is so it makes it easy. So I really enjoyed that process of it.
Oh,
And
cool.
I thought that was incredibly helpful. And I can see how that would be incredibly helpful for clients.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, one other piece that people always tell me that they find helpful that I think I often forget about because, we maybe don't think about this when we think about recovery is just these simple check-ins that help you identify how you're feeling. And it's meant to help you start to
Yeah.
recognize patterns around stressors and triggers and to develop a plan to regulate them. And a lot of people will comment like, I didn't realize that feeling lonely and bored are two of the biggest things that I'm feeling on a daily basis. And they're able to chat with their group about it or start forming ideas about how they can better manage those things that end up helping prevent compulsive behavior and ultimately just help them be a healthier person. So I think even, allowing them to tailor that part of recovery to them as well and making that, a gentle, easy, it takes 2 minutes to do. And
Hmm.
you can set a reminder when I get home from work, I'm going to check in, gives me a chance to reflect on how I'm feeling and preempt any potential issues that without a tool like this, it might be a little hard to manage those pieces without getting a little overwhelmed, like you're saying.
Yeah, it can just feel so big. And then, if you're tracking that, if you're writing that in a journal, it can feel overwhelming. This is something that you have with you. It cues you to do it. So I think it's great. So I'm excited for Relay to see it keep growing and to offer support to a community that really needs it and wants it.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. We're really excited about it, and it's been awesome. I think I've learned a lot about myself in the process. I feel like my recovery journey is never over. I'm continuing to learn and grow in different ways.
Definitely. So we're kind of up on our time here, but I love to ask one question at the end of the episode. If maybe someone is out there struggling, right? They're having a hard time, or they're feeling alone or isolated or whatever, and you could tell them one thing, what would be the one thing you would want them to know?
Yeah. I think it goes back to one of those things I was saying about my early story, about this struggle does not define you. It does not define how successful of a person you are right now. It shouldn't define your happiness on a day-to-day basis. And I know that that's harder, to implement that brain switch than maybe it sounds. But I would want, each of you to know that I think this opportunity to learn how to heal, to learn how to grow in this way, I think is something that is actually extremely precious, and I think can help us grow into much more capable, healthy human beings than if we hadn't had these type of challenges in the first place. My wife actually, like any normal human being, this has hurt her in her own way.
Yeah.
But there's times that she'll often tell me, I feel like this has been a big investment in you, and everything I love about you is because you've chosen to work through this process and develop from it. And that's given me a lot of, I think, reassurance. And I would hope, to pass on that message to others, that it's hard to notice the growth that you're undergoing when you are, feeling crushed by it on a day-to-day basis. But I promise you will be able to recognize one day, if you stick with it, that this was a key part of how you progressed and how you grew to become a way better person than you could have otherwise been. And so definitely just continue forward, know that you're not alone, get a good support system, whether that's through Relay or somewhere else. And the journey gets a lot less sucky from there. I can tell you that.
Oh, Chandler, thank you so much. I just really connect to your passion and your excitement about this. And it's very contagious. So awesome. I want to thank you for also supporting the Addicted Mind podcast, because in a way,
for sure,
this is about connection too. It's other people can hear stories like yours to be able to feel not so alone. So just thank you for coming on. Before you go, where can they go to find more information, to find the app? Where do they go?
Yeah. So you can just go to the website, www.joinrelay.app. Or it's on iPhone or Android. You can just search Relay. Probably just search like Relay Recovery in the App Store, so that it's the first Relay that shows up in your list. Everyone is stolen all, common names these days. So if you search Relay Recovery, you'll see it in the App Store and can give it a try. So
awesome. Thank you, Chandler, so much for coming on to the Addicted Mind and sponsoring the Addicted Mind. I really appreciate it. And
thank you for
it's
all the work
awesome that you're here.
Thank you. No, this is great.
All right, everyone. Thank you for listening. As usual, all the links will be in the show notes at theaddictedmind.com. So check it out and check out the Relay app. I definitely highly encourage you, if you're struggling with addiction and want more support, Relay is a good place to start. All right, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll talk to you on the next episode.